The screaming did not come from a mouth. It came from the walls, from the floorboards soaked so long in smoke and animal fat that they had learned how to remember pain. Bones were found first, small ones, cleaned too carefully, stacked behind a stove that had not burned in decades. The fire had gone out, but the heat never left. Even now, the air in that hollow carries a smell like scorched hair and iron-rich soil. People who walk there say their teeth ache. Dogs refuse to cross the creek. The ground itself seems to recoil, as if it knows what was buried and what was burned before anyone thought to write it down. There are places where history does not sleep. It festers. It waits in the dark, feeding on bloodlines and silence, passing itself down the way other families pass down names. This is one of those places. Which city are you watching from? And what time is it right now? The records call it Briar Hollow, though no sign ever marked the turnoff. In county archives, the name appears and disappears like a clerical error, misspelled, crossed out, rewritten by different hands across different decades. The hoe. Low sits folded into the Appalachian spine, a narrow wound between ridges where fog settles low and refuses to lift. Old maps from the 1890s show it as a cluster of 12 structures, all bearing the same 3 surnames repeated until the ink grows thin. Church minutes list births without fathers, deaths without causes, marriages that connect back to themselves if traced far enough. By 1976, our hollow was already dying, though no one from outside would have noticed. Fewer than 150 people remained. Most had never left. The road in was unpaved, rutted deep enough to swallow a tire, and impassable most winters. Electricity arrived late and unreliably. Some houses never connected at all. Oil lamps still burned, wells still groaned. The forest pressed close, reclaiming fences, swallowing raves whose markers had rotted to nothing. Children were raised with rules that made no sense to outsiders. Do not go near the lower creek. Do not enter the old smokehouse. Do not ask why certain rooms stayed locked. Do not speak names that belong to the dead, especially the dead who never left. That November the cold came early, leaves blackened on the branches overnight. The hollow went quiet, in the way it only did before something broke. 3 boys were seen together near the tree line, their breath white, their jackets thin. They were laughing, witnesses said later, though no one could recall what about. By dusk they were gone. At first it felt familiar. Children wandered. Sometimes they hid, sometimes they ran. But when the dark settled and the hollow stayed empty of their voices, something older than fear began to move through the families. Mothers checked locks that had not been touched in years. Fathers stood in yards staring toward the woods, listening for sounds they already knew would not come. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood the same thing. This had happened before. The families in Briar Hollow had long known the shape of absence. It was carved in their bones, folded into their blood, whispered in the soft clatter of plates on wooden tables at dusk. The Whitakers, the Cools, the Hensleys, names that appeared on every ledger and gravestone, had lived here for generations, and with each passing century, their lineages twisted back upon themselves. Marriages between cousins were so common that children often had no concept of what the outside world called normal. Their features repeated like motifs in a folk song: high, narrow foreheads, deep-set eyes that held suspicion and memory beyond their years, and the peculiar way their lips compressed when they were confused or afraid. Some families noted the faint speech impediments that lingered across generations. Others noticed the sharp intelligence, the ability to memorize and recall wit, unnatural precision, and the same families whispered of other traits, darker, harder to name. When Daniel Whitaker, Marcus Whitaker, and Joseph Cole disappeared that November afternoon, it was not the first time the hollow had swallowed children, but it would be the last in a pattern that stretched back more than a century. The men who gathered with lanterns and flashlights, trudging the forest, floor with aching legs and frostbitten fingers, called out names into the cold, their voices echoing and bouncing against the hillsides, only to meet the oppressive silence that had long claimed the hollow. The quarry was always the first place they searched, Abandoned since the 1920s, its jagged cliffs had been used by miners long dead, and the water at its base reflected the grey Appalachian SK. Why with the stillness of a tomb? The searchers lowered ropes, probed the edges and dragged nets through the black water. Every cabin, every overgrown hollow, every cave where the air smelled of damp stone and decay was checked. Dogs followed scents for a while, circling at the edge, whimpering, then refusing to go further. By the third day, when the state police arrived from miles away, the search had become ritual, shouting names, tossing stones, hoping for the echo of children's voices. But no answer came. In the wake of the boys' disappearance, families recoiled inward. Newspapers arrived from Charleston and Pittsburgh, with ink smudged across photographs of the same faces repeated in the archives. Cousins married to cousins, eyes too close together, children too quiet, too observant. C. Amera's captured homes whose walls had not been repainted in decades, floors blackened by oil lamps and smoke, and the journalists shivered as they walked the narrow paths, sensing a tension older than their own fears. The media barely understood what they were seeing. Doctors noted developmental differences, genealogists noted endless loops in family trees, but most visitors left uncomprehending, while the hollow itself seemed to close behind them, swallowing the attention, the cameras, leaving only whispers. By Christmas, the search was formally abandoned. Memorials were held, candles flickered in the cold, and the hollow returned to its muted, oppressive routine. But the absence of those three boys became a living thing. Every November, families placed flowers at the quarry's edge, and OT in hope, but in acknowledgement. And children, when warned not to wander near the water, sometimes turned pale and glanced toward the dark line of cliffs, as if remembering something they had never been told. No one dared speak of the pattern out loud, but some records remained hidden in the county archives, children disappearing, returning after years with no memory of time past, their body aged oddly, their minds untouched by what had elapsed. Those whispers would remain, waiting decades until something or someone brought the hollow's truth back into the light. Spring arrived 15 years later with an odd serenity, the kind that felt fragile against the weight of long winters and longer secrets. In May of 1991, the mountain laurel bloomed along the ridges, pink and white clustered, trembling in a wind that barely stirred the hollows below. The roads were clearer now, wider in some places, but the hollow itself had not changed. Briar Hollow remained folded in on itself, its forests thick, its houses sagging, and the quarry still reflecting the grey sky with a deceptive calm. It was a Friday afternoon when David Richardson, a state highway patrol officer, noticed three men walking along the shoulder of Route 52. They moved slowly, their steps hesitant, as if uncertain the earth beneath them would hold. Their clothes were outdated, worn, their hair long and unkempt, faces that had been seen in photographs decades before. Richardson felt a prickle of unease. There was something wrong in the way they carried themselves, in the hesitation that preceded every glance toward the trees. He pulled over. The men stopped, eyes wide, scanning the road, the forest, the patrol car. The tallest of them finally spoke, his voice rough, unused to sound. Where is Hollow Creek? Richardson, trained to assess threats, felt none here. He called out slowly, gently, trying to gauge their awareness. They gave him names he would never forget. Daniel Whitaker, Marcus Whitake, R. Joseph Cole. Names that were supposed to belong to children missing for 15 years. He asked for identification. There was none. Fingerprints were later taken at Monroe County Hospital. They matched records from 1976, the small yellowed cards preserved in state archives. The boys were back. They had aged 15 years, their bodies grown, yet their eyes held the same startled confusion. Same awareness of a world they had never inhabited. The men insisted their memory had not moved forward. They remembered the late afternoon of November 14, 1976, the cold settling across the hollow, the laughter at the quarry, the sudden darkness. They remembered waking on the side of Route 52 in May of 1991, unchanged in mind, unchanged in perception, yet 15 years older in body. When he families arrived, the hollow seemed to shiver. Thomas Whitaker, seeing Daniel, could not speak. His son's face was the face of a 12-year-old boy, yet the shoulders and hands belonged to a man. Sarah Whitaker collapsed, gasping, unable to reconcile the son she had mourned for so long with the stranger now before her. Martha Cole and Robert Cole arrived soon after, standing frozen as Joseph, now 28, met their gaze. Doctors confirmed what the families feared and did not. The men were physically healthy. Their dental records matched. Brain scans, blood tests, everything confirmed their identities. Yet their minds told another story. Dissociative, disoriented, they described 15 years lost in a single disorienting moment. Psychiatric evaluations revealed no deceit, no ray. Eosol, they had truly been gone, experiencing the passage of time differently, locked in a perception that refused the continuity of the outside world. The hollow itself seemed to acknowledge their return. Doors creaked open on their own. Dogs whimpered at their presence. The wind carried the echo of voices long gone. And the quarry still waited, black and still, knowing what it had done, or perhaps what it had only facilitated, a quiet, patient witness to the slow erosion of time in human flesh. The return of Daniel, Marcus and Joseph unsettled more than their families. Briar Hollow had not just preserved isolation, it had preserved patterns older than the oldest trees in the hollows, generations of repeated names, repeated faces, repeated unions between cousins and second cousins had concentrated something within the bloodlines, a mutation unseen, unfathomable, now revealed in the boy's altered experience of time. Scientists called it a neurological anomaly, a rare mutation affecting temporal perception, but to the people of Briar Hollow, it was simply the hollow claiming its own. Researchers arrived quietly at first, bringing notebooks, cameras, and equipment. It hummed and clicked. Dr. Richard Petton, a geneticist from Johns Hopkins, spent 3 months tracing the Whitaker, Cole, and Hensley families. He documented 7 generations of intermarriage among fewer than 30 family lines. Blood tests revealed recessive disorders, developmental variations, cognitive anomalies. Yet one discovery eclipsed all others: the Whitaker-Cole-Hensley mutation alter. How the brain experienced the flow of time. It compressed, stretched, and folded moments. 15 years could pass in what a mind felt as a single afternoon. The environment of the hollow, the quarry, the mineral composition, the low-level radiation, interacted with this genetic mutation to produce what Dr. Petton called a temporal displacement event the boys themselves were silent witnesses to. This unnatural compression. Daniel struggled most. He had been 12 in his mind, and yet faced a world where all the social cues, machinery, technology, and relationships of 15 years had passed without him. Marcus retreated into rooms, filled with belongings of nieces and nephews he had never met, staring for hours at the walls, as though by observing carefully he might stitch time back. Joseph, trapped in the echo of adolescence, refused to acknowledge the new world. He insisted he was still 13, waiting for the day everything would reset. Families watched helplessly. Their grief had been extended, distorted, returned to them in a new, harsher form. Parents aged, bodies bent and worn by time, while their children remained locked in the perception of youth. The hollow, a repository of repeated mistakes, had delivered a cruel lesson in the fragility of continuity. County archives offered a haunting context. Reports from 1847 detailed 2 Hensley girls disappearing near the same quarry, found 6 weeks later with signs of unnatural aging. In 1889, a boy named Thomas Cole vanished, returning 3 years later claiming only days had passed. In 1923, 4 children disappeared, 3 returned, aged disproportionately to the calendar, 1 never found. A pattern emerged across decades. Children born of the intermarried families, near the quarry, exposed to environmental anomalies, experienced time differently. By the 1990s, scientific investigation could document, but not resolve, the phenomenon. Brain scans, blood tests, psychiatric evaluations, each confirm the same paradox: their bodies aged normally, their consciousness did not. Temporal perception, a faculty normally hidden, was fractured. The quarry had always been a silent accomplice, a dark locus where environment and heredity converged, indifferent to human understanding. The hollow held its breath, as it had for centuries, as though acknowledging that explanation, however precise, would ease the trauma it exacted. The boy's return was a moment of wonder for science, but a prolonged wound for families, and yet, Briar Hollow would not release them entirely. The hollow's shadow stretched further still, beyond science, beyond the fragile comfort of names on paper. By 1993, the state quietly purchased the land surrounding the quarry, erecting fences and warning signs. Official record cited environmental contamination, radon exposure, a precaution against lingering hazards. But the truth was more elusive. The hollow did not need fences. It had already claimed its lessons. Children who had survived its distortions grew wary, their parents' whispers forming invisible barriers. Those who returned carried the memory of absence, even if they could not articulate it, and those who vanished again, decades before or after, left scars in minds and bloodlines that no bureaucracy could repair. Daniel Whitaker tried to anchor himself in the world that had moved on without him. The farm his father maintained became a place to perform the motions of life, to stitch together years that had passed outside while he had slept through them. Yet every action felt foreign. Hands that had once grasped small tools now manipulated grown timber with unease. He could plow, he could sow, but the rhythm of years, the measured passage of sun and moon, confounded him. Sleep did not heal, it only reminded him of the hollow's interruption. Marcus Whitaker withdrew almost entirely, spending his days in the childhood room that had become a museum of lives he had never lived. Photographs, toys, letters, and trinkets from a niece or nephew he did not know surrounded him, each object a marker of years stolen. He spoke rarely, his gaze distant, tracing patterns in dust motes that floated in shafts of late afternoon sunlight. The hollow had not merely taken him, it had taught him how to exist in stillness, suspended in a world moving without consent. Joseph Cole fared worst. Psychology. Cal evaluation revealed dissociation so severe that Dr. Helen Morrison continued monthly visits for years. He refused to accept that 1991 was real. He insisted every day, every month, every decade was a lie. His eyes held the clarity of a 13-year-old trapped in a body grown too large, a mind untempered by 15 lost years. He sat on the porch of his childhood home, silent as the forest pressed in, the wind carrying faint echoes of laughter that never reached him, never belonged to him. Through the hollow, the pattern revealed itself in shadows of records forgotten. Newspapers and county files, dusted over and hidden in basements, chronicled a repeating cycle, children vanishing, time disjointed, the quarry implicated across generations. The townsfolk who survived this history paired of the hollow as if it were alive, a sentient presence that tested the bloodlines it had nurtured. It did not care. It observed, it shaped, it punished with patience, measured not in days, but in decades. Outside scrutiny eventually ebbed. The scientific teams departed, their reports filed in journals few read. Mainstream media, uncomfortable with explanations too intricate, too dark, drifted toward simpler mysteries. Briar Hollow, reduced now to fewer than 50 souls by the 2020s, persisted as a vessel of memory, a slow tomb of isolation, genetics, and environmental anomalies, converging in ways too strange to name. And the quarry remained, still, black, waiting. Its water reflected the grey Appalachian sky, hiding what it had witnessed and what it could yet repeat. Time within its shadow did not flow evenly. It was not supernatural, not magical. It was a truth written in rock and blood, in the folding of generations into themselves, in the slow terror of a hollow that had learned to remint with its children. By the mid-1990s, the lives of the three returned men had diverged into shadows of what they might have been. Daniel Whitaker, though physically grown, carried the mind of the boy who had vanished. Every morning was an exercise in reconciling the weight of 15 lost years. Familiar faces had aged, landscapes had shifted, and the rhythms of life that others took for granted felt alien. On November 14, 1994, exactly 18 years after he disappeared, Daniel walked to the edge of the quarry. The wind blew sharp across the cliffs, the water below shimmered black. In the stillness of the hollow, he climbed the fence. His body was found 3 days later, floating where reflection and shadow met. The autopsy reported drowning, but the mind behind those movements remained a mystery. No note, no explanation. Only the quiet acknowledgement that the hollow takes what it gives, and gives only what it takes. Marcus Whitaker retreated further from human contact. He moved to Charleston, working construction jobs that allowed him to perform physical labor without the obligation of relationships, without the complexity of connection. He existed in the rhythm of tasks, never in conversation, never in the world of temporal continuity. In 2003, at the age of 38, he died in a workplace accident. His life, measured in years, had only encompassed the 27 years of conscious experience he had carried within him. Joseph Cole lingered longest in Briar Hollow, tethered by the slow decay of his parents, Martha and Robert, who tended him as best they. He never worked, never married, never bridged the chasm between the 13-year-old he felt himself to be and the man he had become in body. When Martha died in 2008 and Robert followed months later, Joseph's tether to the world snapped further. He was placed in a group home where he remained until 2011, dying at 58, a man in years, but still trapped in a boy's mind. The hollow had given him life, and the hollow had withheld it. The quarry, the center of all disturbance, remained untouched by human understanding. Core samples had revealed unusual mineral compositions and low-level radioactive fields. The spikes in environmental exposure, combined with the rare genetic mutation concentrated through generations of isolation, had created a temporal distortion unique to those. See children. Science could measure it, document it, and explain it, yet it could not soften its consequences. Families grieved, not for absence alone, but for the altered lives that returned. Love could not reconcile time lost, and the hollow did not care. By 2020, Briar Hollow had dwindled further. Fewer than 50 people remained. Most were elderly. Young families had left for distant cities, varying the unremarkable continuity of ordinary life. The church, once a repository of family histories, had closed in 2015. The school had collapsed in 2018. The hollow's structures rotted under wind and snow, reclaimed slowly by the forest. Only the quarry, the black mirror of what had been and could not be, remained intact, fenced yet impossibly silent, its water still hiding the truths it had always witnessed. The story of Daniel, Marcus, and Joseph persists not merely as mystery, but as a record that isolation shapes biology, that genetics carries consequences beyond comprehension, that time is not merely a line, but a fabric which can be folded and stretched by forces indifferent to human understanding. The Hollow's experiment continues in memory, in bloodlines, in whispered warning. NGS passed from parent to child. The land remembers. The families remember. The hollow remembers. The Hollow Creek quarry still waits, as it always has, its water black and deep, reflecting only the grey Appalachian sky. No fences, no warning signs, no scientists or cameras can change its nature. Time there does not obey the clocks of men. It moves according to rules written in bloodlines and St. 1. In genetics folded in on itself across generations, in minerals older than any human record. The hollow is patient. It does not hurry. It does not forget. It simply observes, indifferent to grief, indifferent to curiosity, indifferent to life. Daniel Whitaker's death did not close the story. Marcus and Joseph's lives were echoes of the same lesson. The hollow shapes those who dwell too long. In its shadow, the three boys left no children. The genetic line that produced the temporal anomaly ended with them. The mutation, concentrated by centuries of intermarriage, will not continue unless it arises spontaneously among the few remaining families, a rare spark in the dark. The hollow's calculus is precise, its ethics unknowable. Science can explain mechanism, but not consequence. Hollow Creek itself teeters on the brink of erasure. By 2025, only a handful of houses remain occupied. Mailboxes still bear the Whitaker name. One Cole family persists stubbornly. The forest encroaches, reclaiming roads, burying stone foundations. The church, where generations once baptized, married, and mourned, is gone. Even the memories of those who stayed are fading, carried into old age by bones too fragile to sustain every detail. The hollow is quiet, but it has not forgiven. Across the mountains, across the isolated valleys and remote settlements, the Hollow Creek anomaly whispers to those who would study or trespass. Other genetic populations exist in other places, isolated, insular, carrying variations that science cannot yet predict. Each carries the potential for experiences beyond ordinary comprehension. Perceptual shifts, temporal distortions, cognitive fractures. The ethical dilemmas mount as understanding grows. Knowledge tempts, but interference can destroy. The Hollow's secret is the balance between observation and consequence. Daniel, Marcus, and Joseph remind us that human experience is fragile, mutable, shaped by biology and circumstance, by isolation and history, by the slow accumulation of decisions made over generations. Love could not reclaim time. Family could not restore experience. The Hollow shaped what they became, and their bodies, aged by the calendar, could not reconcile with the consciousness they carried. Now, the quarry waits in silence. The water reflects only what approaches it, hiding what it has seen. The trees grow denser each year. The wind carries faint whispers of children long gone, of time stolen and returned fold. Dead and broken. Hollow Creek will vanish within another generation, but its story endures in the echoes of its descendants, in the sparse archives, in memories too stubborn to fade completely. The boys missing from an Appalachian village in 1976 reappeared 15 years later with something unexplained, not a curse, not a conspiracy, but a demonstration of the limits of human biology, the consequence of isolation and the fragility of time as experienced by the mind. Their story is a warning that what seems impossible may be real, that what is inherited may shape lives in ways we cannot predict, that the Hollow remembers all, and it is patient. Time stole their childhood, but could not erase their existence. And somewhere, beneath the canopy of grey mountains, the Hollow waits for its next lesson. The story ends here, but the questions remain.